I bought this camera for $7,987 in 2018. I used it to film 29 Chubby Emu YouTube videos. These are all the things that I've learned from it. When you see a YouTuber who consistently gets several thousand views a video, you're seeing someone who at one point in their online career has had to do everything that you see in those videos themselves. YouTubers have to connect with people. That's the whole reason for making and publishing videos. But the idea of an effective video is channeled through a visual and auditory medium, and therefore must come with some technical know-how. I'm a hobby YouTuber who has had to learn everything about video production from scratch. It took me years to learn what I know now, and it's really shown me how little I know about this space. Back in 2017, I had a very typical starting YouTuber setup. It was my second year making videos. A Logitech webcam with generic fluorescent light bulb softboxes from Amazon. A Canon Rebel T5i with kit lens that was bought on a discount from Costco to vlog. That year, I moved to a Sony setup with the AX53 camcorder and RX10 Mark III hybrid camera. Back then, and even still today, this is more than enough to get you started on YouTube. Really, my channel at that time wasn't making enough to afford those. I had to save up for them with my own money. But for me, I wanted to learn more. If I was going to be in a video, if I was going to make a video, I wanted to know not only how to make it interesting, but to also make it look good. Some people might say that I could learn all of that without jumping into a several $1,000 cinema camera. Today, I might agree with them, but also, I definitely don't, because there was a very sharp learning curve to be had by taking a plunge into a camera, this one specifically, that was way more advanced than I knew what to do with back then. And on this side of having owned it, I'm happy that it taught me all of the things that it did. And so on April 5th, 2018, I took that plunge and purchased the Canon C200. Back then, I had about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, and the reality was, my main channel itself wasn't in quite a stable enough position to afford this camera by itself, and this became a big problem in the months after. Unboxing the camera was one of the most exciting material experiences that I've had in the last few years, but little did I know back then, it was a Pandora's box that I was opening.
The Canon C200, this is what I've been thinking about for God knows how long.
I learned the hard way that the cost of a camera in this range is an iceberg. You see it, but everything associated with it added together is so much more. I needed CFast memory cards to record, which were hundreds of dollars. I needed a reader for those cards. Combined, that's more than $1,000. I needed a bigger tripod because the one that I had for my previous cameras was too small. And video tripods are separated by the legs and the head, so that's another $1,000, which turned out to be a poor use of money because I really didn't like those particular legs, so I ended up buying different ones, which was even more money. I found out that my Amazon softbox lights weren't strong enough. I learned that they shifted green, and only several months later did I realize that the Sony cameras were on auto white balance, compensating for that green, which is actually classified as tint, not white balance. And also, the windows to my studio are tinted green, which made things even more complicated. None of this I would have really learned had I not gone with this camera, but with the benefit of learning came with even more costs. When I bought bigger lights, I realized I needed bigger stands. With bigger stands meant grip gear to help rig the lights, to help flag off light, to help diffuse light. Sometimes you need the bounce light. Well, that clip is $90, and that stand that it's on, it's $200. With bigger lights means bigger batteries. Some of these batteries didn't come with chargers, so you have to buy them separately. Thousands of dollars for batteries. I wanted to learn, right? And eventually I ran out of hard drive space from those CFast cards recording RAW, so I bought a RAID array, which got errored and may have corrupted all of my data, so I got spooked and I had to buy a tape drive for the long-term backup, each drive costing almost as much as the camera itself. I collected all this stuff in the years following the purchase of the C200, so it wasn't just overnight, but it was definitely Pandora's box that I was opening that day. And so with all of these costs, what exactly did I learn from this camera? Well, I have a love-hate relationship with this camera because on the one hand, when I get it to produce a good image, it produces a great image. But on the other hand, it took me maybe 2 years to finally get a halfway decent image out in the first place.
We are recording in RAW. This is the first time ever on April 30th, 2018, Monday.
You can see it in the early Chubby Emu videos that were shot on this. The C200's big feature is that it shoots Canon Cinema Raw Light. You hear from other videos that shooting in RAW produces great color, but the reality is, if you're a newbie like I was back then, until you've shot for several years, you're not gonna appreciate the color depth. Not because you don't want to, but just because you can't, because you don't have enough experience. But it's more than just 12-bit color that you get from RAW. You get the aspect of debayering. Now, I'm not going to get too technical here, mainly because this gets more bare to the metal than I know, but camera raw footage is generally straight sensor data, and it can be interpreted differently as time goes on. This is one reason why some people say that red raw footage is future-proof, that there exists a time later where software can read and show the footage differently. I think this is akin to having a film reel, and the footage from that reel can look different based on the scanner that it goes through. This is different from what you would get on a Sony mirrorless XAVC because a compressed codec doesn't get interpreted, it just gets played back. I got to see this during the time that I own this camera because in Davinci Resolve, there's both a Resolve debayer and a Canon debayer in the Canon RAW tab, both of which do in fact look different. The Canon option, I don't remember looking like this in Resolve in 2018, and I don't know what Canon debayer it's referencing in Davinci because if you use the Canon RAW development official software to transcode Canon RAW Lite to ProRes, it doesn't look like that either. But it does now, and to me, that is one sharp looking image. The other benefit to RAW is being able to debayer to different color spaces, although in the last 3 years, there's still not much support for HDR, so Rec 2020, PQ, HLG, at least for YouTube content. I haven't used it anyways. With the Canon name on the camera comes interoperability with Canon lenses. Originally, I had gotten their L series EF mount lenses, which are used on their photo cameras. They were okay, but I wasn't super impressed with them, mainly because the camera is Super 35 and the lenses are full frame. But what I was impressed with was the Canon Cinema lenses. Unfortunately for me, I got to testing out the Cine primes only recently. Having used Rokinon Cine since May 2019, the Cine primes really are in a different league when it comes to both functionality and build quality. Realistically, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between the two lenses in terms of image rendered out. Psychologically, you think you're getting a better image with the Cine because of what you're holding in your hands. It's heavier, it's more solid, it has a huge focus throw. I'm skeptical that you're getting actual 10 times the image because it's 10 times the cost. The thing I really liked about the Cine primes though is that in the native EF mount you have electrical contacts. This passes lens data including the name of the lens and the t-stop of the shot. But the best feature here is that the focus guide goes directly to the eyes when faces are in the frame. And this helps to make sure that your image is sharp. To me, this alone is worth the price of admission. Without needing focus peaking, you can easily tell when you are in focus on a person. And if you want it to focus on something else, just use the touch screen and it detects whether it's in focus or not. If the lens did have the motor to autofocus, the camera would pull to it, but since it's on a cinema lens, it doesn't. But it knows once you've pulled focus to the object of interest. And the markers tell you which way to turn, shallow versus deep. And so that's amazing, but the problem is, in 2021, you're running the risk of Canon doing something like having RF mount Cine lenses, as they may be focusing on their new native mount now. I don't know this for sure, but I wouldn't doubt it. And locking yourself into a set that has less versatility across different systems than the PL mount does, well, you're gonna have to weigh that cost. If you already bought in, I think you should be good, but I haven't yet, so I wanna be mindful of where I put my money. 8 months after I bought this camera, I got the Canon Cine 18-80 t4.4 compact Cine zoom lens. This is basically a one-stop shop lens for this entire camera. It has autofocus, it has stabilization, it has very good zoom range on a servo motor. If you can control for lighting or you're shooting outdoors, T44 is totally fine. If you really wanted to throw out the background and focus on the subject, put the lens wide open, zoom past 50 mils and get closer to your subject. For this camera, you can go to ISO 6400 from the native 800 in RAW and have no problems, but you'll need to denoise. The Cine lineup and how it works with this camera are so good that I actually had to really think long and hard about how I want to move forward with my camera setup today. Because this is so seamless of a system with everything that I want and need. Great image, great battery life, easy focusing system, relatively small package, and reliability. This camera and the entire system holds up fantastically in 2021, and I think it can continue to hold on well for several more years. Honestly, probably going into 2025. But this brings me to some of the issues that I have with my current position in this camera. The first is that I don't own a set of Cine primes for two reasons. The first is I don't have $25,000 for a set of lenses. And not just any lenses, lenses that possibly in the near future will be of a mount that's not really produced anymore. Now, I know the EF line is going to hold up for at least the next 10 years because it's already held up for decades. So many people have lenses in this system going back 10, 20 years that it's not going to disappear anytime soon. We're probably going to be 15 years down the line in 2036 and people will still have EF stuff. But right now, I could adapt the Cine EF primes to other cameras that I own, but it kind of defeats the purpose because I would use these Cine lenses with a Canon camera for the focus guide. Sony and Blackmagic don't have that guide, so basically this would be like any other manual focus lens. So in that case, why wouldn't I go with Sigma Cine or Zeiss CP3? And optically, this is a great lens set, but for 25 grand, I'd probably spend that money differently. The second issue that I had with this camera was the need for a B camera. I'm starting to do more interviews as a solo operator, and that would need B and C cameras, but I don't have a Canon mirrorless camera. Actually, because of my 2017 history with Sony, I have an A7R3 and Sony E-mount glass. So I was thinking of getting a second Canon camera in the form of a C300 Mark III. Then the C200 would have been the B cam, but that's a lot of money, and it pushes my E-mount glass down the line. I was also thinking of the XF705, which I know is not the most popular camera out there, but camcorders are like the best general YouTuber camera because they literally have everything that you need except for shallow depth of field. A camcorder like this is literally the smallest size YouTube setup that one can have that actually just does everything. I do still take some photos, and moving over to Canon would then mean buying a Canon mirrorless, which I'm not going to do if I have an A7R3. This was all before the C70 came out, which I was considering, but things have changed now because of one thing. In late 2020, the Sony A7s3 was announced. Having E-mount glass and prior experience with the A7S2, the S3 was the B camera and the smaller setup that I was looking for. And if the C300 Mark III is $10,000, C70 is $6,000, well, there's a second Sony camera that was announced just after the A7S3 called the FX6, which is full frame, can adapt EF mount glass, or really any mount for that matter, that matches exactly with the A7S3. And when bought with the A7S3, I have two cameras that match for the price of one C300 Mark III. And it doesn't just stop here. The two Sonys have the ability to shoot external RAW, although Final Cut, in terms of coloring video, doesn't even come close to what Davinci does. And you know what really gets me? Even audio interpretation in Davinci is louder and richer sounding than in Final Cut. I don't know why, but in Chubby Emu videos, I rely heavily on the Ken Burns effect on stills, and Davinci is so god-awful at that, so I cut on Final Cut mainly, though it's a reluctant choice. With that being said, everything in the workflow for the C200 simply takes longer than compared to the Sonys. The Canon RAW files are larger, and they still don't play back smoothly on my computer. Even transferring footage off the cards takes longer for CFast 2.0 versus CF Express Type A on the Sonys. There's also a perpetual issue that I've had with this image. I've chalked this up to the room that I mainly shoot in having wooden floors reflecting that color back into the camera, but whenever I shoot with the C200, even if it's in RAW, every single shot has to be massaged, because if it's not, the image looks washed out straight out of the camera. This is with the wide DR LUT on RAW and in the XF AVC 8-bit codec. I've noticed this happens basically on all Canon cinema and video cameras, even in different environments, but it depends on the room that you're in. In some environments, it doesn't do this, but when you massage that image, you get a really, really good looking image. I would say after massaging, it looks way better than the Sony's does straight out of the camera. But this brings us back to YouTubers doing almost everything that you see in their videos. Even though Chubby Emu has a couple million followers and probably should hire an editor and graphics designer and all that, I don't. I still do everything myself. Honestly, I would still have to provide the editor with medical images that I usually have to find or generate myself anyways, which I do while I'm editing. So the less time that I spend tweaking every single shot that comes out of the camera, the more time I can spend thinking about how to lay out the video, thinking about how best to explain some medical concept, thinking about how best to tell the story of a patient. The less time I spend worrying about Canon Cinema Gamut, Canon Log 2, the more time I can spend thinking about how people learn from and understand my videos, which is connecting with people, and thus is the reason why I make and publish videos in the first place. The reality is, when I look back at all of this, it was an investment on my own learning. It's the reason why learning things on your own is often more expensive than if you have a mentor. I'm lucky in my professional life that I have those mentors, but here on YouTube and in the video making space, I'm on my own, and I'm thankful to be in a position where people enjoy and learn from my videos and are patient enough to sit with me as I learn all of these new things. If you're curious, I'm now on an FX6 setup with an A7S3 B cam, and going back to full frame, having shot on Super 35 on the C200 for 3 years, I can finally appreciate the difference. I like both because for certain projects I use a PL-modded Blackmagic Pocket 6K, which is Super 35. So my next foray into learning more about camera things is this Laowa 25-100 Cine zoom that has an anamorphic rear adapter. You can see a video that I've made about it, link in the description below. I'm drawn to that lens because it's a faster zoom than the 18-80. It also has that anamorphic adapter, and also it was made in my mom's hometown, which I've never seen before in my life, so that's super cool. I've ordered a set of vintage rehouse lenses too, full frame, which I'm also very curious as to how those will impact my camera work. Had I not had some Sony equipment already, had the A7s3 not come out, had the Cine primes not cost $24,000 for a set on a mount that might not be developed anymore, I definitely would have stayed with the C200 for at least the next 3 to 4 years. It holds up fantastically in 2021 and will continue to even after the C200 Mark II comes out, after the supposed C90 comes out. I don't even need to know what those cameras will do because I know the C200 is still a great camera, period. Everything that I learned so far in my video production career, including lighting, exposure, focus, monitoring, white balance, log gammas, color grading and color space transforms, camera raw, and debayering, have been thanks to this camera. Its impact on my videos are a permanent record in my body of work, and the wonderful experience of using it during these formative years for me is something that I will never forget. Thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourself, and be well.